Tonight we are stepping quietly inside a Roman palace. Long after the crowds have gone and the torches have begun to dim, imagine marble halls resting in silence, soft footsteps echoing faintly, and warm lamplight flickering against ancient stone. This is Rome at night, calm, powerful, and unhurried. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you something, and you can answer quietly right now in the comments. As you listen tonight, would you rather fall asleep inside a Roman palace or inside a medieval castle? Just type Roman or castle below and then allow yourself to relax completely. The subject of this discussion pertains to the conditions and circumstances that characterize the interior spaces of a Roman palace during the nighttime hours, which is to say during that portion of the daily cycle when the sun had descended below the horizon and darkness had settled over the landscape. A palace, in the context of Roman civilization, was a large residential structure designed to house individuals of significant social standing, along with their families, their servants, and the various persons who were required for the maintenance and operation of such a household. The word palace itself derives from the Latin term palatium, which in turn takes its name from the Palatine Hill, one of the 7 hills of Rome, where the Emperor Augustus established his primary residence during the early years of the Roman Empire, a period that began approximately in the year 27 BCE and continued for several centuries thereafter. The purpose of examining what occurred within such a building during the night is not to suggest that anything particularly remarkable or unusual took place during these hours, for in truth the nighttime activities of a Roman palace were, for the most part, quite ordinary and unremarkable in their nature. People slept, as people have always slept and continue to sleep, because the human body requires regular periods of rest in order to function properly. Lamps were lit to provide illumination in the absence of sunlight, because human eyes are not well adapted to seeing in complete darkness. Guards watched over the entrances and passages of the building, because valuable property and important persons required protection from those who might wish to do them harm. These activities and others of a similar mundane character constituted the substance of night within a Roman palace, and it is these activities that will be described in the pages that follow. Before proceeding to a description of the nighttime conditions within a Roman palace, it will be useful to establish certain preliminary facts concerning the nature of such buildings and the society in which they existed. The Roman civilization, which flourished in the Mediterranean region and beyond during the period roughly spanning from the 8th century BC to the 5th century CE, produced a distinctive architectural tradition that combined influences from earlier Greek and Etruscan building practices with innovations developed by Roman engineers and craftsmen. This architectural tradition included the construction of temples, public baths, amphitheatres, aqueducts, roads, and numerous other types of structures, among which residential buildings of various sizes and degrees of elaboration occupied a significant place. The residential architecture of the Romans ranged from simple dwellings of modest dimensions to vast complexes that might cover several acres and contain dozens or even hundreds of rooms. At the upper end of this spectrum were the palaces of the emperors and the great houses of the senatorial aristocracy, buildings of such size and complexity that they functioned almost as small cities in themselves, with their own water supplies, heating systems, gardens, workshops, and populations of servants and dependents. It is this type of building that forms the subject of the present discussion, though it should be noted that many of the conditions described would have applied, with appropriate modifications, to smaller and less elaborate residences as well. The construction of a Roman palace typically began with the selection of an appropriate site, which might be located within a city, on its outskirts, or in a rural area at some distance from urban centres. The choice of site was influenced by various considerations, including the availability of land, the proximity to sources of water, the nature of the terrain, the climate of the region, and the preferences of the person for whom the building was intended. Once a site had been selected, the process of construction would commence, involving the labour of architects, engineers, craftsmen, and workers who might number in the hundreds or even thousands for a project of significant scale. The materials used in the construction of Roman palaces included stone, brick, concrete, wood, and various other substances that were available in the region or that could be transported from elsewhere in the empire. Stone was quarried from numerous locations throughout the Roman world, with different types of stone being valued for different purposes. Marble, which was prized for its beauty and durability, was used for columns, wall facings, floors, and decorative elements. Travertine, a type of limestone, was commonly used for structural purposes. Tufa, a volcanic stone, was employed in many buildings in and around Rome. Brick, made from fired clay, was used extensively in Roman construction, often in combination with concrete to create walls, arches, and vaults of considerable strength and durability. Concrete, which the Romans developed to a high degree of sophistication, was one of the most important building materials of their civilization. Roman concrete was made by mixing volcanic ash, known as pozzolana, with lime and water, and then combining this mixture with an aggregate of small stones or broken pottery. This material could be poured into forms and would harden into a substance of great strength, allowing the construction of domes, vaults, and other architectural forms that would have been difficult or impossible to achieve with stone alone. The concrete core of a Roman wall was typically faced with brick, stone, or other materials to provide a finished appearance, but it was the concrete that gave the structure its fundamental strength and durability. The layout of a Roman palace followed certain general principles that had evolved over centuries of architectural practice, though individual buildings varied considerably in their specific arrangements. The typical plan included a series of rooms and spaces organized around one or more central courts, which served to admit light and air to the interior of the building. The atrium, which was the traditional central hall of a Roman house, featured an opening in the roof called the compluvium, through which rainwater entered and was collected in a shallow basin called the impluvium. This arrangement provided both illumination and a source of water for the household, while also creating a visually impressive space that served as the primary reception area for visitors. Beyond the atrium, the plan of a Roman palace typically included a tablinum, which was a room used as an office or study by the master of the house, and a peristyle, which was an open courtyard surrounded by a colonnade and often containing a garden. The peristyle was a feature borrowed from Greek architecture and became increasingly common in Roman houses during the later Republican and Imperial periods. Around the peristyle were arranged various rooms serving different functions: triclinia for dining, cubicula for sleeping, storage rooms for provisions and household goods, kitchens for the preparation of food, and numerous other spaces as required by the needs and preferences of the household. The decoration of these rooms was accomplished through various means, including the application of painted plaster to walls, the laying of mosaic floors, the installation of sculptural elements, and the use of textiles such as curtains, cushions, and coverings. Wall paintings, or frescoes, were executed in a variety of styles that art historians have classified into four main periods, each characterized by distinctive approaches to the representation of space, architectural elements, and figurative subjects. These paintings might depict scenes from mythology, landscapes, still lifes, or purely decorative patterns, and they serve to transform the plain plaster surfaces of walls into visually interesting and aesthetically pleasing displays. Mosaic floors were created by setting small pieces of coloured stone, glass, or ceramic, known as tesserae, into a bed of merite to form patterns or images. The simples, T-mosaics, consisted of geometric designs in black and white, while more elaborate examples featured complex figurative scenes rendered in a full range of colours. The creation of a mosaic floor was a skilled craft that required considerable time and labour, and the finest examples represent remarkable achievements of artistic and technical virtuosity. These floors provided a durable and easily cleaned surface that was well suited to the heavy use that public rooms in a palace would receive. The furnishing of a Roman palace included items of furniture such as beds, couches, tables, chairs, stools, chests, and cabinets, manufactured from wood, bronze, ivory, and other materials. Roman beds, or lectae, consisted of a wooden frame, often with decorative elements at the head and foot, supporting a mattress. Was stuffed with wool, straw, or other materials. Couches for dining, known as lectuli or triclinium couches, were similar in construction, but designed for reclining rather than sleeping. Tables, which might be round, rectangular, or of other shapes, served various purposes in different rooms of the house. Chests and cabinets provided storage for clothing, documents, valuables, and other items. The textiles used in a Roman palace included curtains, which might be hung in doorways to provide privacy or to control the flow of air through the building, cushions, which provided comfort on the hard surfaces of wooden furniture, coverings for beds and couches, and rugs or carpets, which were used in some contexts, though less commonly than in later periods and other cultures. These textiles were made primarily from wool and linen, with silk being an expensive import that was used sparingly even in wealthy households. The colours and patterns of these textiles contributed to the overall decorative scheme of the rooms in which they were placed. Having established these preliminary facts concerning the construction, layout and furnishing of a Roman palace, it is now possible to proceed to a consideration of what occurred within such a building as the day drew to a close and night approached. The transition from day to night was, of course, a gradual process that occurred at different times depending on the season of the year and the geographical location of the palace. In Rome itself, which is situated at a latitude of approximately 41 degrees north, the length of the day varied from about 9 hours at the winter solstice to about 15 hours at the summer solstice, with corresponding variations in the length of the night. As the afternoon progressed and the sun descended toward the western horizon, the light within the palace would gradually diminish. The shadows cast by columns, walls, and other architectural features would lengthen, and the quality of the light would change from the bright illumination of midday to the warmer, more golden tones of late afternoon. Within the atrium, the patch of sunlight that entered through the compluvium would move across the floor and eventually disappear, as the sun's angle became too low for its rays to penetrate the opening. In rooms with windows, the fading light would enter at an increasingly oblique angle, illuminating only portions of the space while leaving other areas in growing shadow. The activities of the household would shift in response to this changing light. Tasks that required good visibility, such as reading, writing, or detailed craftsmanship, would need to be concluded, moved to areas where artificial light could be provided. The preparation of the evening meal, which had likely been underway for some hours in the kitchen, would continue under the light of lamps or the glow of the cooking fires. Slaves assigned to the lighting of lamps would begin their rounds, moving through the various rooms and corridors of the building to provide illumination where it was needed. The process of lighting the lamps in a Roman palace was a routine task that was nonetheless essential to the functioning of the household after dark. The lamps used for this purpose, known as lucernae, were small vessels designed to hold oil and a wick, the combustion of which produced light. The most common form of Roman lamp was made from terracotta, or fired clay, and consisted of a rounded body with a central opening for adding oil, a nozzle or spout from which the wick protruded, and often a handle for carrying. More expensive lamps were made from bronze, and the wealthiest households might possess lamps of silver or even gold, though these were relatively rare. The oil used as fuel in these lamps was typically olive oil, which was produced in large quantities throughout the Mediterranean region, and was among the most important commodities of the Roman economy. Olive oil was used not only for lighting, but also for cooking, for personal hygiene, for religious rituals, and for numerous other purposes. The quality of olive oil varied, with the finest grades being reserved for culinary and other uses where taste and purity were important, while lower grades were used for lighting and industrial purposes. In regions where olive oil was less available or more expensive, other oils derived from nuts, seeds, or animal fats might be substituted. The wick of a Roman lamp was made from fibers of flax, papyrus, or other materials that could absorb oil and burn steadily. The wick extended from the oil reservoir through the nozzle of the lamp, where it was ignited to produce a flame. The size and brightness of this flame depended on various factors, including the quality of the oil, the condition of the wick, and the amount of oxygen available for combustion. A well-maintained lamp with fresh oil and a properly trimmed wick would burn steadily with a clear yellow flame, while a neglected lamp might smoke, flicker, or produce an uneven light. The number of lamps lit in any particular room of a Roman palace depended on the activities planned for that space and the preferences of its occupants. A small bedroom might require only a single lamp to provide sufficient light for undressing and preparing for sleep, while a large dining room in which guests were being entertained might have dozens of lamps placed on stands, hung from chains or mounted on walls to create a bright and festive atmosphere. The slaves responsible for lighting maintained supplies of oil and wicks, trimmed the wicks as necessary to ensure proper burning, and replaced lamps that had become worn or damaged. In addition to portable lamps, some Roman buildings were equipped with fixed lighting fixtures, such as bronze stands designed to hold multiple lamps, or candelabra that could accommodate candles or torches. These fixtures provided more substantial illumination than single lamps, and were often placed in important locations such as the atrium or the principal dining room. The design of these fixtures ranged from simple functional forms to elaborate decorative pieces featuring sculptural elements, intricate metalwork, and luxurious materials. The finest examples of Roman lighting fixtures are works of considerable artistic merit and craftsmanship. Candles, which consisted of a core of fibrous material surrounded by wax or tallow, provided an alternative to oil lamps for illumination. Beeswax candles were preferred for their cleaner burning and more pleasant odour, but they were relatively expensive and were therefore used primarily in wealthy households or for special occasions. Tallow candles, made from rendered animal fat, were less costly, but produced more smoke and an unpleasant smell when burning. Both types of candles were used in Roman households, though oil lamps remained the more common form of lighting throughout the period. Torches, which consisted of bundles of reeds, wood splinters, or other combustible materials bound together and sometimes soaked in pitch or resin, provided a brighter but less refined form of illumination. Torches were typically used outdoors, in entrance areas, or in large spaces where their smoke would not be objectionable. The flickering light of torches created dramatic effects of light and shadow, and they were often used in processions, ceremonies, and other occasions where spectacle was desired. In the quieter context of a palace at night, torches might be used to light the entrance or the garden, while oil lamps provided the gentler illumination preferred for interior spaces. As the light of day faded and the lamps were lit, the evening meal would be approaching or already underway in the triclinium. The cena or dinner was the main meal of the Roman day, and was typically consumed in the later afternoon or early evening, though the exact timing varied according to season and circumstance. In a palace, this meal might be an elaborate affair involving multiple courses, carefully prepared dishes, fine wines, and the entertainment of guests, or it might be a simpler meal taken with only family members present. The nature of the meal depended on the occasion, the preferences of the household, and the resources available for its preparation. The triclinium, where the cena was consumed, was named for the 3 couches that were traditionally arranged in a U-shape around a central table. Each couch, or lectus, could accommodate 3 diners who reclined on their left sides, propped on cushions, and ate with their right hands. The open side of the U-shaped arrangement allowed servants to approach the table to serve food and drink and to clear away dishes between courses. The position of each diner on the couches was determined by social conventions that assigned places of greater or lesser honour according to the relative status of the guests. The food served at a cena in a Roman palace might include a wide variety of dishes depending on the season, the region, and the wealth and tastes of the household. A typical meal might begin with a gustatio, or appetizer course, consisting of eggs, vegetables, olives, and similar light foods designed to stimulate the appetite. The main course, or prime mensae, might include meat, fish, or poultry prepared in various ways, accompanied by vegetables, grains, and sauces. The meal would conclude with the secondae mensae, a dessert course of fruits, nuts, and sweet items. Wine mixed with water was the standard beverage, served from amphorae and mixed in a large bowl called a crater before being distributed to the diners. The preparation of such a meal required considerable labour and skill on the part of the kitchen staff, who would have been at work for hours before the meal was served. The kitchen, or culina, was typically located in a back area of the palace, away from the principal living spaces, to keep the heat, smoke, and odours of cooking from disturbing the family and guests. The kitchen was equipped with hearths for cooking over open flames, ovens for baking bread and other items, and a variety of pots, pans, utensils, and implements necessary for food preparation. Running water might be available for cooking and cleaning, depending on the water supply to the building. The slaves who worked in the kitchen included cooks of varying degrees of skill and specialization, assistants who performed basic tasks such as chopping vegetables and tending fires, and porters who carried food and supplies to and from the kitchen. The head cook, or kokus, was typically a slave of considerable training and experience, whose skills were valued highly by the household. In some cases, a particularly talented cook might be purchased for a very substantial sum, reflecting the importance placed on fine cuisine by wealthy Romans. The organisation and direction of the kitchen staff was part of the larger management of the household, which fell under the supervision of the steward or other senior slaves. As the scena concluded, the activities of the household would gradually shift toward those appropriate for the later hours of the evening. Guests who had been present for the meal would prepare to depart, engaging in the formalities of farewell and expressing gratitude for the hospitality they had received. The host might accompany departing guests to the door, or servants might be assigned to escort them through the building and out into the street. The departure of guests marked a transition in the atmosphere of the palace, as the social performance of entertainment gave way to the more private rhythms of family life. The cleaning that followed the scena was the responsibility of slaves assigned to this task. Dishes, cups, and utensils were collected from the triclinium and carried to areas where they could be washed and stored. The remains of food were cleared away, with some portions perhaps being distributed to slaves or set aside for later use. The couches were tidied, with cushions and coverings straightened, and any spills or stains attended to. The floor was swept, and any lamps that were no longer needed were extinguished or removed. This work would be accomplished as efficiently and quietly as possible, allowing the family to proceed with their evening activities without disturbance. The activities of family members in the hours between the conclusion of the scena and retirement for sleep varied according to individual preference and circumstance. Some might engage in conversation, discussing the events of the day, family matters, or topics of general interest. Others might spend time in reading or writing, pursuits that were valued by educated Romans and that could be continued by lamplight if the reader's eyesight was adequate to the task. Still others might listen to music, as musical instruments such as the lyre, the tibia, a type of flute, and the cithara were known and played in Roman households. Games of various kinds, including board games and dice games, were also popular diversions. The spaces of the palace used for these evening activities depended on their nature and on the preferences of the household. The atrium, which served as a reception area during the day, might be used for family gatherings in the evening, though its size and relative openness made it less intimate than some other spaces. The tablinum, the study or office of the master of the house, might be used for reading, writing, or private conversations. The peristyle garden, if the weather was pleasant, offered an outdoor space for walking or sitting, with the sounds of fountains and the scents of flowers providing a sensory backdrop. Smaller rooms scattered throughout the building might serve as sitting rooms or private retreats where individuals could pursue their own activities in relative solitude. As the evening progressed, the household would gradually settle into a quieter mode of existence. Children and the elderly, whose need for sleep was typically greater than that of adults in their prime, would be among the first to retire to their bedchambers. Slaves who had completed their evening duties would return to their quarters when permitted to do so. Family members would one by one conclude their evening activities and prepare for sleep. The sounds of conversation, music, and other activities would fade, replaced by the quieter sounds of a household preparing for rest. The process of preparing for sleep in a Roman palace involved certain routine activities that varied according to individual habit and social status. For important members of the household, slaves would be available to assist with undressing, removing the day's clothing and replacing it with simpler garments suitable for sleeping. Personal hygiene activities might include washing hands and face, using the latrine or a chamber pot, and perhaps applying lotions or ointments to the skin. Hair might be loosened from the arrangements worn during the day, and jewellery and other accessories would be removed and stored safely. The bedroom or cubiculum to which family members retired was typically a small room designed primarily for sleeping. Roman bedrooms were often simply furnished, containing a bed, perhaps a small table or chest, and a lampstand or bracket. The walls might be painted with frescoes, though these were often of simpler design than those in more public areas of the house. A window, if present, would usually be small and positioned high on the wall to admit light and air, while maintaining privacy. The floor might be paved with mosaic or simple tiles, or it might be of beaten earth or wood. The bed itself, the lectus cubicularis or sleeping bed, consisted of a wood in frame, sometimes raised on legs and sometimes closer to the floor. The frame supported a mattress, which might be stuffed with various materials depending on the wealth of the household: wool, feathers, or down for the wealthy, straw, reeds, or chaff for those of lesser means. Over the mattress, linens of wool or linen would be spread, and coverings appropriate to the season would provide warmth as needed. Pillows stuffed with feathers, wool, or straw supported the head, and cushions might provide additional comfort for those who desired it. The experience of lying down to sleep in a Roman bedroom would involve the physical sensations of the bed and bedding, the visual impressions of the dimly lit room, and the auditory environment of the building at night. The mattress would compress under the weight of the body, conforming to some degree to its contours while providing support. The bedding would provide warmth and a sense of enclosure. The lamp, if still burning, would cast moving shadows on the walls and ceiling, its flame flickering with any currents of air. The sounds of the household would have diminished to a murmur, with only occasional footsteps, voices, or other noises disturbing the quiet. For those who fell asleep easily, this transition from wakefulness to sleep would occur relatively quickly, the mind and body relaxing into unconsciousness within a relatively short period of lying down. For others, the process might be longer, with thoughts continuing to occupy the mind and physical restlessness delaying the onset of sleep. The Romans, like people in all periods of history, experienced varying degrees of difficulty in falling asleep, and their medical writers offered various remedies for those who struggled with this problem. These included dietary recommendations, the avoidance of stimulating activities before bedtime, use of certain herbs believed to promote sleep, and adjustments to the sun's sleeping environment. The quality of sleep obtained in a Roman bedroom was influenced by numerous factors, many of which were similar to those affecting sleep in any era. The comfort of the bed and bedding, the temperature of the room, the presence or absence of disturbing noises, the health and mental state of the sleeper, and the quantity and nature of food and drink consumed before retiring all played roles in determining how well and how long a person slept. The best conditions for sleep, a comfortable bed, a quiet and appropriately cool room, freedom from physical discomfort and mental worry, were more likely to be achieved in a wealthy household than in poorer circumstances, though no amount of luxury could guarantee good sleep to those whose bodies or minds were troubled. The darkness of a Roman bedroom at night was considerably more complete than what modern urban dwellers typically experience. Without electric lighting, the only illumination in a room would come from any lamps left burning, from moonlight entering through windows, and from the general sky glow if the night was not completely overcast. Once a lamp was extinguished, the room would be quite dark, with only the vaguest outlines of furniture and walls visible to eyes adjusted to the darkness. This deep darkness was the normal condition of night for most of human history, and Roman sleepers would have been accustomed to it in a way that those living in electrically lit environments are not. The sounds of a Roman palace at night formed a distinctive auditory environment that was quite different from the soundscape of the daytime hours. The voices of people going about their daily business, which filled the building during the day, would be largely absent, or they were replaced by quiet or near silence. The footsteps of slaves moving through the corridors on necessary errands might be heard occasionally, their soft padding contrasting with the busier traffic of daylight hours. From the garden, the sounds of fountains or other water features would continue, their gentle splashing or trickling providing a continuous background. Insects might chirp or buzz, depending on the season and location. From outside the palace walls, various sounds might penetrate depending on the urban or rural setting of the building. In Rome itself and in other major cities, the nighttime streets were often surprisingly busy due to regulations that prohibited wheeled vehicles from operating within the city during daylight hours. The famous traffic jams of ancient Rome, memorably described by the poet Juvenal and other authors, were primarily a nighttime phenomenon, with carts, wagons and other vehicles clogging the narrow streets in the hours after sunset. The sounds of this traffic, wheels on paving stones, the shouts of drivers, the braying of donkeys and mules, the general commotion of commercial activity would have been audible to those living in urban palaces, filtering through windows and walls to disturb the sleep of those sensitive to noise. Rural palaces, by contrast, would have enjoyed a quieter nighttime environment with the sounds of nature predominating over those of human activity. The calls of night birds, the chirping of insects, the rustling of leaves in the wind, and the occasional sounds of domestic animals would form the auditory backdrop to sleep in such settings. The difference between urban and rural nighttime soundscapes was significant and would have been noticeable to anyone who moved between these environments. Some wealthy Romans maintained both urban and rural residences, and the city would have experienced both types of nighttime environment at different times. The temperature within a Roman palace at night varied according to season, weather, and the heating or cooling systems employed in the building. During winter, when nights were cold, the hypercaust heating system provided warmth to those rooms equipped with this technology. The hypercaust worked by circulating hot air beneath the floor and sometimes through hollow tiles in the walls, radiating heat into the room above. The furnace that produced this hot air was located in a separate chamber and was tended by slaves who added fuel to maintain the fire at an appropriate level. The fuel used was primarily wood, though charcoal might be employed in some situations. Maintaining the hypocaust through the night required slaves to remain awake to tend the furnace, adding fuel as needed and monitoring the temperature of the system. This was demanding work, as the heat from the furnace made the area where the stokers worked quite uncomfortable, and the need to maintain the fire throughout the long hours of the night meant that sleep was impossible during periods of duty. The slaves assigned to this task would work in shifts, with some tending the furnace while others rested, so that the heating could continue uninterrupted through the night. Not all rooms in a Roman palace were equipped with hypercaust heating, and those that were not would rely on other means of warmth during cold nights. Portable braziers, which were metal basins in which charcoal or other fuel could be burned, provided localized heat that could be placed where it was needed. These braziers had to be used with care to avoid the risk of fire or the buildup of dangerous fumes, and adequate ventilation was important when using them in enclosed spaces. The heavy blankets and coverings on beds also provided warmth, trapping the body heat of the sleepers to maintain a comfortable temperature within the bedding. During summer, when nights were warm, the challenge was cooling rather than heating. The architectural design of Roman palaces incorporated various features that helped to moderate interior temperatures. The thick masonry walls provided thermal mass that absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly at night, reducing temperature fluctuations. The courtyards and gardens at the center of the building allowed air to circulate, and windows and doors could be opened to admit cooling breezes. The water features and gardens also contributed to cooling through evaporation, and the overall effect could be quite comfortable even during the hottest weather. The orientation of rooms within a Roman palace was considered carefully in relation to the sun's path and the prevailing winds, with the goal of creating comfortable conditions throughout the year. Rooms on the north side of a building would receive less direct sunlight and would therefore be cooler, making them suitable for use during summer. Rooms on the south side would receive more sun and would be warmer, making them preferable during winter. The Romans were well aware of these relationships between building design and climate, and their architectural writers, such as Vitruvius, discussed them at length in their treatises. The hours of the night, as measured by the Romans, were not of fixed length, but varied according to the season. The Roman system of timekeeping divided both the day, from sunrise to sunset, and the night, from sunset to sunrise, into 12 hours each. In summer, when days were long and nights were short, each daytime hour was correspondingly long, while each nighttime hour was short. In winter, the reverse was true. Only at the equinoxes, when day and night were of equal length, were the hours of day and night also equal. This variable system of hours meant that the experience of a winter night, with its longer hours of darkness, was quite different from that of a summer night. The measurement of time during the night could be accomplished through various means. Water clocks, or clepsydrae, measured time by the controlled flow of water from one vessel to another, with markings on the vessels indicating the passage of hours. These clocks had to be calibrated for the variable hours of the Roman system, which added complexity to their design and use. The position of stars in the sky also indicated the passage of time to those familiar with astronomy, and the movement of celestial bodies across the heavens provided a natural clock that required no mechanical device. The changing of the guard at regular intervals served as another marker of time's passage for those within a palace. The division of the night into 4 watches of 3 hours each, Prima Vigilia, Secunda Vigilia, Tertia Vigilia, and Quarta Vigilia, was originally a military practice that was also used in civilian contexts. These watches provided a framework for organising nighttime activities, particularly those related to security and guard duty. A slave or guard assigned to the first watch would be relieved at the end of that period by someone assigned to the second watch, and so on through the night. This system ensured that security was maintained continuously, while also allowing those with nighttime duties to get some rest during off-duty hours. The security of a Roman palace was a significant concern, particularly for the wealthiest households and most especially for the imperial residence itself. The valuables contained within such buildings, money, jewellery, precious objects, expensive furnishings, made them attractive targets for thieves. More importantly, the persons of the family, including the master of the house and his wife, children and other relatives, needed to be protected from potential harm. In the case of the emperor, this concern for personal safety was paramount, as the assassination of emperors was not uncommon in Roman history, and the consequences of inadequate security could be politically catastrophic. The security measures employed in a Roman palace included the physical design of the building, with strong doors and locks controlling access to sensitive areas, the posting of guards at entrances and other key locations, and the organisation of a night watch to patrol the building during the hours of darkness. The guards might be slaves belonging to the household, hired watchmen, or in the case of the imperial palace, soldiers of the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal military force. The night watch would move through the building at regular intervals, checking doors and windows, looking for signs of intruders or fire, and generally maintaining vigilance against any threats to the household. The doors of a Roman palace were closed and secured at night, with the main entrance typically being locked or barred after the evening's visitors had departed. A doorkeeper, or ostiarius, might be stationed at the entrance to control access and to open the door for any legitimate late arrivals or early morning visitors. This doorkeeper might sleep near the door, ready to respond to any knocking or to investigate any disturbance. Internal doors within the building might also be closed and secured, particularly those leading to storerooms, private quarters, or other sensitive areas. The locks used on Roman doors were mechanical devices operated by keys, and both locks and keys survive in the archaeological record in sufficient numbers to demonstrate their widespread use. Roman keys were typically made of iron or bronze, and came in various sizes and designs depending on the complexity of the locks they were meant to operate. Some locks were quite sophisticated, featuring multiple pins or wards that had to be aligned correctly for the lock to open. Others were simpler, providing less security, but requiring less skill to manufacture and operate. In addition to keyed locks, doors could be secured with bolts, bars, or other physical barriers that required no key but could only be operated from inside. The concern for fire was another important aspect of nighttime security in a Roman palace. Fire was a constant danger in ancient cities, where wooden construction, open flames for cooking and lighting, and the close proximity of buildings created conditions that could allow a small fire to spread rapidly into a major conflagration. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, during the reign of Nero, destroyed a significant portion of the city and demonstrated the devastating potential of uncontrolled fire in an urban environment. Subsequent building regulations required greater use of fire-resistant materials and wider streets to serve as fire breaks, but the risk of fire remained significant. Within a palace, the night watch would include attention to fire prevention as part of their duties. Guards would check to ensure that lamps and braziers were properly attended and that no uncontrolled flames were present in areas where they might cause harm. The kitchen fires would be banked after the evening meal, reducing but not eliminating the source of heat. Any signs of smoke or flame in inappropriate locations would be investigated immediately, and the household would have procedures in place for responding to fire, including designated assembly points and methods for raising the alarm. The slaves who lived and worked in a Roman palace would retire to their own quarters when their evening duties were completed and they were permitted to rest. The location and conditions of slave quarters varied considerably, depending on the household. In some cases, slaves might sleep in small rooms clustered in a particular area of the building, perhaps in an upper story or in a back section away from the main family quarters. In other cases, slaves might sleep in the rooms where they worked, such as near the kitchen, the stables, or the workshop. Personal slaves who attended on important individuals might sleep in small rooms adjacent to their master's chambers, or even on pallets at the foot of their master's beds. The quality of slave accommodations depended on the attitudes and wealth of the household owner, the status and value of the particular slave, and other factors. Some masters provided their slaves with adequate bedding, privacy, and time for rest, recognizing that well-treated slaves would work more effectively and be more loyal. Others were less considerate, crowding slaves into uncomfortable quarters and allowing them little rest. The range of conditions experienced by slaves in Roman households was thus quite broad, and generalizations about their nighttime experience must be made with caution. Those slaves who remained awake during the night to perform necessary duties would experience the hours of darkness quite differently from those who slept. Guards and watchmen would spend their shifts in a state of alert attention, watching for any disturbance or threat. Slaves tending the hypercaust furnaces were held work in the hot and uncomfortable conditions near the fire, adding fuel and monitoring temperatures. Slaves assigned to attend on family members who were ill, elderly, or otherwise in need of nighttime care would remain awake and available to provide whatever assistance was required. These nighttime workers would sleep during other portions of the day, when their duties permitted. The passage of time during the night was marked by the gradual movement of celestial bodies across the sky, by the slow burning down of lamps and candles, by the changing of the guard at designated intervals, and by the subtle shifts in temperature and atmosphere that characterized the progression from evening through the deep hours of night to the approach of dawn. For those who slept, these changes went unnoticed, and time passed without awareness until waking brought a return to consciousness. For those who remained awake, time might seem to pass slowly or quickly, depending on the nature of their activities and their state of mind. The imperial palace on the Palatine Hill represented the most elaborate example of Roman residential architecture and provides a particularly interesting case study for understanding the conditions of night in a Roman palace. The complex of buildings that evolved on the Palatine over the course of the imperial period included multiple residences, reception halls, temples, gardens, and service areas, covering much of the hilltop in a sprawling maze of structures. The Domus Augustana, constructed under the Emperor Domitian in the late 1st century CE, was among the most impressive of these buildings, featuring grand public spaces on its upper level and more private living quarters on the lower level. The Domus Augustana was organized around several peristyle courts, which provided light and air to the surrounding rooms and created spaces of varying degrees of privacy and formality. The reception rooms on the upper level included the Aula Regia, a vast throne room where the emperor received visitors and conducted official business, and the Triclinium, an enormous dining room that could accommodate large numbers of guests for state banquets. These public spaces would have been brilliantly lit during evening functions, with hundreds of lamps and torches illuminating the richly decorated walls and floors and reflecting off the polished marble surfaces. The private quarters on the lower level of the Domus Augustana included bedrooms, sitting rooms, and other spaces for the personal use of the emperor and his family. These rooms were smaller and more intimate than the public spaces above, though still lavishly decorated with frescoes, mosaics, and fine furnishings. A garden court at the centre of this level provided a private outdoor space where the imperial family could walk, sit, and enjoy the plants and water features without being observed by the public. The sounds of fountains in this garden would have been a constant presence in the private quarters, providing a pleasant background to the activities of day and the rest of night. The security of the imperial palace was maintained by the Praetorian Guard, a military force that served as the emperor's bodyguard and that had its main camp on the outskirts of Rome. Soldiers of the guard would be stationed throughout the palace, including at the entrances, along the corridors, and near the emperor's personal quarters. The presence of these armed men throughout the night provided a level of security not available in ordinary households, though it was not always sufficient to prevent attempts on the emperor's life. The assassination of Domitian himself, who built the Domus Augustana, took place within the palace at the hands of members of his own court, demonstrating that no amount of security could guarantee the emperor's safety. The emperor's own bedroom would have been among the most carefully guarded spaces in the Roman world. Located in the private section of the palace, it would be approached only through a series of controlled access points, each monitored by guards. The room itself might contain multiple exits to allow escape in case of emergency, and trusted body servants would sleep nearby or within the chamber itself, ready to respond to any need or alarm. The furnishings of the imperial bedroom would be of the finest quality, with a bed of excellent construction, luxurious bedding, and decorative elements befitting the ruler of the Roman world. Despite these advantages of security and comfort, the sleep of emperors was not always restful. The burdens of rule, the constant possibility of betrayal, and the weight of decisions affecting millions of lives could trouble the mind and disturb sleep. Ancient authors record various emperors as having difficulty sleeping, suffering from nightmares, or engaging in activities during the night rather than resting. The Emperor Caligula, for example, was said to wander the palace at night when unable to sleep, calling upon the dawn to arrive. These reports may be coloured by the biases of their authors, but they suggest that the experience of night in the imperial palace was not always one of peaceful rest. The contrast between the imperial palace and more modest Roman residences illustrates the range of experiences that might be comprehended within the general category of a night in a Roman palace. The scale of the buildings, the number of inhabitants, the level of luxury, and the degree of security varied enormously across the spectrum of Roman domestic architecture. Yet certain fundamental elements remained constant: the need for light in the hours of darkness, the need for warmth in cold weather and cooling in hot weather, the need for rest during the night, and the need for security against various threats. These basic requirements shaped the experience of night in Roman palaces of all sizes and in all periods of Roman history. The gardens that formed an integral part of Roman palace design continued to exist and to function during the nighttime hours, though their role and appearance changed with the fading of daylight. The plants that filled these gardens, trees, shrubs, flowers, herbs, and vines, maintained their biological processes regardless of the hour, though photosynthesis ceased and respiration became the dominant metabolic activity. The scent of flowers might be particularly noticeable at night, when some species released their fragrance more strongly, and when the reduced visual stimulation allowed greater attention to be paid to other senses. The water features that decorated Roman gardens, fountains, pools, channels, and cascades, continued to operate through the night, their flow maintained by the constant pressure of water from aqueducts or elevated cisterns. The sound of falling and flowing water would be a persistent element of the nighttime soundscape in any room adjacent to such features. The surface of pools would reflect whatever light was available, whether from the moon, the stars, or lamps placed nearby. The cooling effect of evaporation from these water features would contribute to the moderation of nighttime temperatures in areas near the garden. The sculptural decoration of Roman gardens included statues of various subjects: gods and goddesses, mythological figures, heroes, emperors, animals, and decorative elements placed throughout the plantings to create visual interest and to evoke particular themes or associations. At night, these sculptures would be visible only as darker shapes against the background of foliage and sky, their detailed features obscured by the low light. The effect might be somewhat eerie to modern sensibilities, with silent figures seeming to watch from the shadows, but Roman viewers would have been accustomed to these presences and would have understood them as part of the familiar landscape of their homes. The small creatures that inhabited Roman gardens, insects, birds, small mammals, and amphibians, had their own patterns of nighttime activity. Many insects became more active at night, their chirping and buzzing contributing to the soundscape of the garden. Nocturnal animals such as bats might be present, hunting the insects that the garden attracted. Frogs and toads in the pools might call during certain seasons. Birds would generally be quiet and roosting during the nighttime hours, though some species might call occasionally or stir if disturbed. This animal life formed part of the living environment of the garden, continuing its activities regardless of whether human observers were awake to notice. The kitchen area of a Roman palace, which was a scene of intense activity during the preparation of the meals, became much quieter during the nighttime hours. The fires that had burned in the hearths and ovens would be banked rather than extinguished, maintaining a bed of coals that could be revived in the morning without the need to start fires from scratch. The pots, pans, and utensils that had been used during cooking would be washed and put away. The work surfaces would be cleaned, and any scraps or refuse would be disposed of appropriately. The slaves who had laboured in the kitchen would have retired to their quarters, leaving only perhaps a single watchman to guard the stores and the sleeping fires. The food supplies maintained in a Roman palace included both perishable items that needed to be consumed relatively quickly and preserved goods that could be stored for longer periods. Fresh vegetables, fruits, meat, and fish would be kept in cool locations and used within a day or two of acquisition. Grain, dried fruits, dried legumes, salted fish, preserved meats, olive oil, wine, and garum, the fermented fish sauce that was a staple of Roman cuisine, could be stored for much longer periods. The storerooms where these goods were kept would be locked at night to prevent theft or unauthorized access. The wine cellar of a Roman palace was a storage area of particular importance, as wine was consumed in significant quantities and good wine was a mark of a refined household. Amphorae, the large ceramic vessels in which wine was stored, would be arranged in racks or stacked in the cellar, their sealed tops protecting the contents from spoilage. The cool, stable temperatures of an underground or semi-underground cellar helped to preserve the wine, and the darkness of the space was similarly beneficial. The value of the wine stored in a large palace cellar could be considerable, providing another reason for careful security measures. The bathing facilities attached to a Roman palace, which were used primarily during the afternoon hours before the evening meal, would be largely unused during the night. The heating systems that warmed the water and the rooms of the baths would be shut down or reduced to a maintenance level after the last bathers had finished. The marble surfaces of the bath chambers would cool gradually during the night, and the steam that had filled the heated rooms during use would dissipate. The pools of water in the frigidarium, the cold room, would remain still and dark, waiting for the bathers who would not come until the following day. The latrines of a Roman palace were typically communal facilities featuring multiple seats arranged over a drain that carried waste away. Running water supplied from the building's water system flushed the drain and maintained a degree of sanitation. These facilities continued to function during the night, available for use by anyone who needed them. However, the availability of chamber pots in bedrooms reduced the necessity of visiting the latrine during sleeping hours, and the general preference was to avoid moving through the building at night if it could be avoided. The cleaning of latrines was the responsibility of household slaves, who would attend to this task in the morning. The library of a Roman palace, if present, was a room dedicated to the storage and reading of books. In the Roman period, bookmeo took the form of scrolls with text written on papyrus or parchment that was rolled around wooden rods. These scrolls were stored in cylindrical cases and arranged on shelves or in cabinets. The reading of such scrolls required good light, as the handwritten text was often small and close together. While reading might continue by lamplight for those with good eyesight and a sufficient supply of oil, most reading activity would take place during daylight hours. At night, the library would typically be dark and unused, its intellectual treasures waiting for the readers who would come with the new day. The religious shrines within a Roman palace served as focal points for the household's worship of the gods. The lararium, typically located in the atrium, held images of the Lars, protective spirits associated with the household and its ancestors. These small figurines or paintings would be honoured with daily offerings of food, wine, or incense, and prayers might be offered for the protection and prosperity of the family. At night, the lararium would remain in place, the images of the lares watching over the sleeping household. A small lamp might be kept burning before the shrine, its tiny flame a symbol of the continuous devotion of the family to their ancestral spirits. Other shrines within the palace might be dedicated to particular deities favoured by the family, to the genius of the paterfamilias, or to the emperor and the imperial cult. The religious observances associated with these shrines would follow their own patterns, which might or might not include nighttime activities. Certain religious festivals involved nighttime rituals, vigils, or processions, and members of the household might participate in such observances. For the most part, however, nighttime was not a time of intensive religious activity, and the shrines would remain quiet until the morning brought the resumption of daily devotions. The concept of dreaming was of considerable interest to the Romans, who believed that dreams could be significant in various ways. Some dreams were thought to be messages from the gods, providing guidance, warnings, or prophecies of future events. Others were considered to be the result of physical conditions, such as the foods eaten before sleep or the temperature of the sleeping environment. Still others were understood as merely the random play of the mind during sleep, without particular meaning or significance. The interpretation of dreams was a recognized skill, and professional dream interpreters might be consulted regarding particularly vivid or troubling dreams. Within a Roman palace, the dreams of important persons might be taken seriously as potential sources of divine communication or prophetic insight. An emperor who dreamed of a particular event might take that dream as a sign regarding how to proceed with a decision. A senator who dreamed of an unusual occurrence might consult with priests or interpreters to understand its meaning. More ordinary members of the household would also dream, of course, but their dreams would typically be of less concern to anyone but themselves. The content of dreams might be influenced by the events of the preceding day, by physical conditions during sleep, and by the cultural expectations and beliefs of the dreamer. The phenomenon of insomnia, or difficulty in falling asleep or staying asleep, was known to the Romans and was addressed by their medical writers. Remedies suggested for sleeplessness included dietary measures, such as eating lightly before bed and avoiding certain foods thought to disturb sleep, environmental adjustments, such as ensuring adequate ventilation and comfortable bedding, and the use of various herbs and preparations believed to have soporific properties. The root of the mandrake plant and preparations of opium were among the substances known to the Romans that could induce sleep, though their use carried risks and side effects that limited their desirability as routine treatments. The hours between midnight and dawn represented the deepest paras, tea of the night, when the household would be at its quietest and those not on duty would be in their deepest sleep. The silence of these hours would be interrupted only occasionally by the sounds of the building itself, by the movements of guards or watchmen, or by noises from outside the palace walls. The temperature would typically be at its lowest during these hours, as the day's heat had long since dissipated and the sun would not rise to warm the air again for some time. Those who were awake during these hours would experience a particular quality of stillness and isolation that could not be duplicated at any other time. The earliest risers in a Roman palace would begin to stir as the first hints of dawn appeared in the eastern sky. Long before the sun itself rose above the horizon, the sky would begin to lighten almost imperceptibly, the deep black of midnight giving way to progressively lighter shades of grey. This change would be first noticeable to those with windows facing east, and it would gradually become apparent throughout the building as the light increased. Birds would begin to wake and sing, their voices breaking the silence of the night and announcing the approach of the new day. The slaves whose duties required them to prepare the household for the day would be among the first to wake, rising in the pre-dawn darkness to begin their tasks. Fires would need to be lit or revived from the banked coals of the previous night. Water would need to be heated for various purposes. The rooms used by the family would need to be tidied and prepared. The preparations for the morning salutatio, the formal greeting ceremony in which clients called upon their patrons, would need to be made. All of this work had to be accomplished before the family members rose from their beds, requiring the slaves to wake considerably earlier than those they served. The gradual return of light to the palace would reveal the spaces that had been hidden by darkness during the night. The frescoes on the walls, which had been barely visible by lamplight, would emerge in their full colours as daylight penetrated the rooms. The mosaics on the floors would shine as light reflected from their polished surfaces. The architectural features of the building, columns, mouldings, and decorative elements, would become clearly visible once again. The garden would emerge from the shadows, its plants displaying their forms and colours in the morning light. The transition from night to day was thus a process of revelation, as the visual richness of the palace that had been hidden by darkness was gradually made manifest by the returning sun. This daily cycle of concealment and revelation was an inherent part of the experience of living in a Roman palace, repeated with every sunset and sunrise throughout the year. The building itself remained unchanged, but the experience of its spaces was transformed by the presence or absence of light, creating two quite different environments within the same physical structure. The end of night came not with a sharp transition, but with a gradual brightening that merged imperceptibly into the full light of day. The exact moment when night became day was not defined, and the experience of the transition depended on individual circumstances, where one was in the building, what one was doing, and whether one was awake to observe the change. For those who had slept through the night, the return of consciousness brought with it an awareness of light and sound that signaled the beginning of a new day. For those who had remained awake, the gradual lightening of the sky and the increasing activity of the household marked the conclusion of their nighttime vigil. The morning meal, a simple affair of bread, cheese, and fruit, would be consumed soon after waking, providing sustenance for the activities of the day ahead. The routines of personal hygiene and dressing would occupy the early morning hours, with slaves attending to the needs of those they served. The various activities of the household would resume, each person taking their assigned tasks and responsibilities. The night, with its quiet and its darkness, would recede into memory as the fullness of day asserted itself. And yet the night would return again, as it always did, bringing with it the same patterns of activity and rest that had characterized the preceding evening. The experience of a quiet night inside a Roman palace was thus a complex phenomenon, encompassing the physical environment of the building, the social structures of the household, the routines of daily life, and the subjective experiences of the many individuals who inhabited the space. No two nights were exactly alike, as variations in weather, season, activity, and mood created ever-changing conditions within the stable framework of the building. Yet certain elements remained constant: the need for light, the need for rest, the need for security, and the rhythms of sleeping and waking that governed all human life. The study of such nights offers insights into the daily lives of Romans of various classes and conditions, from the emperor in his magnificent chambers to the king and the slave sleeping on a pallet in the corner of a room. It reveals the technologies employed to create comfortable living conditions, the social arrangements that organized households, and the cultural practices that shaped individual experiences. It connects us, across the span of centuries, to people who faced many of the same basic challenges of existence that we face today, even if the specific circumstances of their lives were quite different from our own. The palaces themselves, or their remains, still exist in many cases, their walls and floors preserved by the accidents of history and the efforts of archaeologists. Walking through these ruins, one can imagine the spaces as they once appeared, filled with furniture, decorated with frescoes, and inhabited by people going about their daily lives. At night, when the tourists have departed and the archaeological sites are closed, these ancient buildings return to darkness, just as they did 2,000 years ago when their original inhabitants retired for the night. The silence of these ruins is not so different from the silence that once fell over them at the end of each day as the household settled into the quiet of nighttime rest. And so the night passes, as all nights do, giving way inevitably to the light of morning and the activities of a new day. The palace, having sheltered its inhabitants through the hours of darkness, prepares to serve its purposes in the hours of light. The cycle continues, as it has continued for as long as humans have built structures to house themselves, and as it will continue for as long as the distinction between day and night governs the rhythms of life on Earth.